Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters. And may Allah bless you and accept your noble effort. I'm honored and delighted to participate with you in these activities. The topic of my lecture is Ethicality and Practicality in Politics. What I will try in this brief lecture is to give you a definition of ethics, politics, and political ethics. And then I will try to give you an idea on the major moral doctrine in modern philosophy. And then I will conclude with a few ideas and reflection on Islamic perspective in this regard. So let's start على بركة الله. So what is ethics? Ethics is the discipline concerned with what is morally good and bad, right and wrong. And these include any kind of system or theory of moral values and principles. The function of ethics, which is a very important function in a human life, is to systemize, defend, and recommend concepts of morally right behavior. In some academic milieu, ethics is also called moral philosophy. Some scholars use the term moral philosophy instead of the term ethics. That is the definition of ethics. So what is the definition of politics? Put simply, politics is the art and science of running governmental affairs. That's the most simple and basic definition of politics, the art and science of running governmental affairs. Of course, there are other definitions of politics. Sometimes politics is used in the meaning of conflict among individuals or parties trying to achieve or keep public authority. When the individual or groups or parties clash with one another in order to reach the position of public authority or to keep themselves in that position, that is also called politics, especially in the media. And in the media also another use of politics, which means the method and tactics used by politicians to achieve or keep public authority. So sometimes we said, oh, it's all about politics, means this is just the behavior of people who are motivated with self-interest in order to come to the public authority or to keep the public authority in their hands. Sometimes politics is used in social sciences in the meaning of social relations involving public authority or power. And sometimes, but not very common, the term politics is used as a synonymous with political science, as a synonym with political science. So in this meaning, politics means the academic study of governments and states. There are many other definitions of politics, but I will keep the first and simple one, which is the art and science of running governmental affairs. Based on the definition we provided for ethics and definition we provide for politics, so what is political ethics, which is a combination of the two terms? Political ethics, which is known also as public morality, and public morality, political morality, and public ethics, all of these terms are used for political ethics. So political ethics is defined as the practice of making moral judgments about political actions. Political ethics is to judge political action from a moral perspective. And it is very important, of course, like any other human behavior, to be judged morally, because morality is what make a human humans. Some political scientists, especially in the realist school of thought, have they have a lot of objections against this idea of political ethics, because they believe that ethics has no place in politics in the first place, and they think that, or they believe that, politics takes place in a very rough world, and therefore uh, individuals and nations are simply pursuing power and trying to achieve their own interest, and we should not expect from them to abide by moral principles. Some of those scholars argue, which is it's a very old argument, started at least a few centuries ago with Machiavelli. They argue that politicians, in order to be effective, they cannot be bound by ethical rules, because ethics, in their view, places limits on the pursuit of power and politics make politicians ineffective and their policies useless. But I don't believe in this argument actually, and I think Muslims in general don't see politics in this meaning, and should not at least see politics in this with this eye. Um, yes, it's true that individuals and nations are trying to achieve their personal or national interest, and there is nothing wrong in that. But political ethics is just requiring these individual and nations to achieve their interest within some ethical boundaries and limitations. Plus, those people who said no ethics in politics actually uh, lead themselves to some kind of self contradiction, because they claim to avoid ethics, but they end up making ethical judgment almost every day, explicitly or implicitly, in their talk. And they present themselves as ethical people to the public at the same time. So when you ask a realist politician or a realist political scientist to justify uh, anything, any claim or any action, he will always appeal to moral principle also. So that means their claim that there is no ethic in politics actually is not true. These are the definition I wanted to talk about. Now let's talk about the major moral doctrine in modern philosophy, because that will help us put this issue of ethicality and practicality in the right context. There are several moral doctrines in modern philosophy, but the most important of those doctrines are categoricalism, utilitarianism, contractualism, and divine command theory. So let's get an idea about these moral doctrines, because that will help us understand the relation between ethics and politics, and how ethical we should be and how practical we should be when we are involved in politics. Categoricalism is a moral doctrine that is said that an action is right only if it can be universalized without contradiction. This is how the great German philosopher Immanuel Kant defined categoricalism. So we need to do everything categorically, means we need to treat people with principle. We need to treat a human being as they deserve to be treated as a human, not necessarily the way they treat us. And we should never use human beings as means, regardless of their difference of race, religion, gender, class, etc. This is the basic notion of categoricalism. The German philosopher, as I said, Immanuel Kant, is the pioneer of this doctrine. He wrote in metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and aesthetic. And his most relevant work in this related to this topic is his book, Foundations of Metaphysics of Moral. So Immanuel Kant then is a very categorical morality or unconditional morality, we can call it. The second moral philosophy is utilitarianism. Utilitarianism, based on this school of thought, an action is right if it achieves happiness or pleasure, and it is wrong if it causes suffering or pain. So we should, based on this view, we should judge every action based on their consequences. If an action is bringing to people happiness, it's moral. If it's bringing to people pain or suffering, it's immoral. And in utilitarianism, every person's happiness or pleasure should be taken into account. The two main philosophers of utilitarianism are the two Englishmen, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill said actions are right to the degree that they tend to promote the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And so we should look at two criteria here, pain and pleasure. Anything that is bringing pleasure to the majority of people is good morally in utilitarianism. Anything that is bringing suffering or pain to the majority of people is morally wrong. That is the basic principle, the basic notion or idea of utilitarianism. The two main theorists of this moral philosophy or doctrine are, as I said, Jeremy Bentham in his book, Introduction to the Principle of Morals and Legislations, and in his book, Utilitarianism, and also another Englishman, John Stuart Mill. So let's move on. One of the very important moral doctrine in modern philosophy is contractualism. In contractualism, the source of morality is the agreement between people on how to deal with one another. Basically, if we have contract about something, that is morally good, as long as we agree to do it. No moral universal principle that you have to follow from contractualism point of view, from this doctrine point of view, there are no moral universal principle. Anything that people agree about is morally good. So people can change their mind, and what is moral today can be immoral tomorrow, or vice versa. And that's what we see, for example, in some Western countries. So homosexuality might be immoral in the United States in the 19th century, but it's morally accepted in the 21st century. Because people agree in the 19th century that is immoral, and they agree in the 21st century that is morally accepted. Of course, that is a problem from an Islamic perspective, as we see. In Islam, we don't accept this kind of fluidity, and the moral principles are more stable because they are taken from Allah Azza wa Jalla. They are not taken only from the uh, contract between people. In contractualism, you have to treat people as they treat you, or what they call the rule of eye for eye. You don't care the way they treat you, you treat them, regardless if that is humiliating or is violating human dignity. The last but very important moral doctrine is what is called divine command theory. In divine command theory, morality is ultimately dependent upon God. Moral obligation is obedience to God's command. God is the source of morality, not a human themselves. And this theory, of course, has a religious roots. All religions believe or are based on this theory that what is right is what is commanded by God, and what is wrong is what is forbidden by God. This theory provides also an objective metaphysical foundation for morality. So morality in this theory is stable. We don't say that homosexuality is okay today and not okay tomorrow. We don't say that it's haram in the 19th century and it's halal in 21st century. That is not acceptable in the divine command theory. Divine command theory, because morality is taken from God, so it has some stability. There are other moral doctrines, but I cannot present all of them tonight because that's going to be too much. There are subjectivism and other school of thought. So I'm going to move on to the Islamic perspective on this. But before that, let me mention just one thing. I think it's very important concept in modern moral philosophy and political ethics, which is the dirty hand theory. Dirty hand theory is a political moral theory defended by the American political philosopher Michael Walzer. And this theory is we can say it's a continuation of the classical Machiavellism. It's kind of revival of the idea of Machiavelli, that the ends justify means. So dirty hand theory is basically the great defender of this. Michael Walzer is saying that in political action we cannot respect moral norm, and that political leaders, it's okay for political leaders to violate the moral principles in order to achieve a great achievement or to avoid great disasters. So politicians, for Michael Walzer, have to do wrong in order to do good. And that's exactly what he's saying. Well, this theory is, as I said, is just a continuation of the idea of the Italian political philosopher Machiavelli in his book The Prince, where he justify the means by the end. So he doesn't care about the means, whether the means are legitimate or not, as long as they achieve your goals. Of course, that's not really acceptable in Islam, as we will see later. So let's now talk about Islamic perspective on this issue of ethicality and practicality in politics. There are two very important scholars who present good idea and good contributions. Good ideas and good contribution in this field of moral philosophy in modern time. One of them is the Palestinian American scholar Ismail Farouqi, especially in his book Justifying the Good, which was his PhD dissertation at the Indiana University. He's a Muslim scholar. He studied Islam at Al-Azhar University, and he studied at Harvard and Indiana University, and he wrote several books. He's the founder of the International Institute of Islamic Thought, the famous and very important Islamic institution. Ismail Farouqi refused this kind of relativism and utilitarianism that is dominating the moral discourse in Western countries, and he's defending the idea that moral values in Islam have self-existent essence, as he called self-existing essence. Humanity, we cannot make the essence of morality just a contract between people that it can change anytime, as contractualists are saying. And we cannot make it just purely utilitarian. What is good for majority is morally right. No. If the majority decide to oppress the minority, for example, and even if they vote for that in a very transparent election, that is morally wrong. So maybe it's good for the majority to oppress the minority, but that is not moral. That is not acceptable morally, as the utilitarian might say. So we can say that no, we cannot follow the utilitarian logic here. We have to follow something more systematic. We have to respect a human dignity, whether this human is part of the majority or part of minority. There are some principles that are above politics and above election and above contract, above even the constitutions. And that's what is missing in the contractualistic doctrine of morality. And also it is missing in the utilitarian doctrine. So Ismail Farouqi bring us to an Islamic perspective that is categorical. The Islamic morality is categorical, like the philosophy of Kant. That's the closest to the Islamic morality. Categorical means it's based on systematic principles without exception. But Islamic morality has some flexibility also. So if there are clash between what is good and bad, so we have to make a decision. We have to do what Muslim scholars call tarjih, to do something that will make us achieve the highest possible good and to avoid the worst kind of bad. Maslaha and mafsada. It's not pain and pleasure as the utilitarian call it. No, in Islam it's not pain and pleasure. That is not the criteria. No, the criteria are maslaha mafsada. It's not pain and pleasure, because sometimes maslaha, or what is good, can be painful. If a doctor has to cut off one of our organs in order to save our life, so this is very painful, of course, but it is maslaha, it's good. So it's not about pain and pleasure. And sometimes many things that people like and they seek pleasure in it is bad also. So like drinking alcohol or committing zina, etc. There are a lot of pleasure in that, but doesn't mean it's good. It's actually not good. So Islamic morality is not based on pain and pleasure, the way utilitarians are saying. It's not based on the right of the majority versus minority, as the utilitarian also would say. It's not based on contract between people. Yes, we have to respect contract, of course. And that's first verse of Surah Al-Ma'idah, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu أوفوا بالعقود. O you who believe, keep or respect contracts, your oath, your contract. But the substance of that contract has to be something legitimate. Contract doesn't make something bad, doesn't transform something bad into good. No. If we have to make contract, we have to be sure that the content of that contract is legitimate and good, first and foremost. So contract itself doesn't create morality. But if the contract is based on something moral, so we have to respect that contract. So Islamic morality is a synthesis. Partially it's categorical. It has some aspect of contractualism because Quran is teaching us to respect contract. But contract itself doesn't create morality. Plus, there are some utilitarianism in Islamic morality in the sense of maslaha and mafsada, not in the sense of pain and pleasure. This is Farouqi, and the other scholar is Dr. Mohamed Abdullah Draj. He's a great scholar from Al-Azhar University. He graduated from Al-Azhar, and then he did his PhD at the University of Sorbonne in France. And he wrote a very beautiful PhD thesis called, in French, La morale du Coran, or the morality of Quran. It's translated into Arabic, Dustur al-Akhlaq fil Quran, and also into English, the moral word of Quran. Dr. Daraz also explained to us that Islamic morality is categorical, but it has a flexibility. So we can have a saying when we have two principles clashing. I mean, if you have to save life or to say the truth, saving life is more important than saying the truth, for example. So you are allowed to lie in order to save the life of an innocent human being, for example, etc. So Islamic morality is flexible, and therefore that's why Islamic morality is giving Muslims the possibility to be both practical and ethical when he's doing politics. Sorry, I have to put charger for my laptop. Just a minute, please. Assalamu alaikum. I'm almost done. I just want to be sure we are on the safe side. So the computer won't turn off without concluding. Well, Sheikh Mohamed Abdullah Daraz, as I said, is a great scholar. He graduated from Azhar University. And then he studied at Sorbonne, and he wrote a beautiful book on the morality of Quran. I wrote a book actually about him. It's called The Philosopher of the Holy Quran, Philosoph al-Quran al-Karim in Arabic. So those of you who read Arabic can read my book on him. And also I recommend you to read his book, especially his book, The Moral Word of Quran. Well, Sheikh Draz he agreed actually with Ismail Farouqi that Islamic morality is partially categorical, partially contractual, partially utilitarian. It's a synthesis of all of these, and it's actually better than all of this because it has the best of all of these three major moral doctrine. And of course, Islamic morality is closer to divine command theory because it's based on the divine command of Allah Azza wa Jal. Okay, let's see now the practical implication of all of this. The title of the lecture is Ethicality and Morality in Politics. So we talked too much about theoretical issues. Now let's see what kind of practical implication. The most challenging problem in politics is the reconciliation between principles and interest. You need to keep your principle, especially as a Muslim. That's your religious and moral obligation. At the same time, you have to achieve the interest of the community and the society. That is not an easy challenge because sometimes when you try to follow the principle, you will sacrifice the interest of the community. Sometimes if you go to follow or to achieve the interest of the community in a pragmatic way, that might lead to the violation of the moral principles. So how can we reconcile principles and interest? I believe that the great politician actually is the person who reconciles between the two. He keep his principles and he achieve the interest of his community at the same time. One of the recent books on on political philosophy is the book of the American thinker Joseph Nye. Joseph Nye is a great scholar. He wrote several books on strategic and political studies. He's the one who coined the concept of soft power and smart power and other important concepts. Joseph Nye published in 2020 a book with the title Do Morals Matter? And he explained to us how can and should politician be a moral person at the same time. Joseph Nye said that good politicians need what he calls contextual intelligence, means he's able to understand the context very well, the context of time, space, and also the potential of the situation he's living in and the constraint of that situation. If you are doing politics in a majority Muslim country, that's completely different from doing politics in a minority when Muslims are a minority, for example. If you're doing politics in a country that is liberal, democratic country, it's different from trying to achieve the interest of the community under bloody dictatorship, totalitarian regime, for example. So every situation is different. So it's very important to take the context into account. Political ethics, according to Joseph Nye, is by definition a contextual phenomenon. Don't try to do analogy with situation in other places and other countries and other period of time that are different, completely different from You need to be smart, especially smart in understanding the context, the situation he's working in. There is also another concept that has been presented earlier by the German-American sociologist Max Weber, and that is the distinction between what he called a morality of conviction and the morality of responsibility. The morality of conviction apply to your own personal life. Any action that has consequences only on you in your personal life, you're free to do whatever you want and to say whatever you want. But when you are doing politics, your action, the consequences of your action is not only on you, but also it will affect the life of other people. And this is what Max Weber called morality of responsibility. When you do politics, when you walk in the public life, you have to be responsible because other people will pay the price of your political choices, of your political decision. You're not the only one who will pay the price of your action and your choices and your political decision, but other people, many other people will pay the price of that. So we need to separate the morality of conviction that apply to our own personal life from the morality of responsibility that applies to public sphere when our decisions affect other people. So I think uh, from an Islamic perspective, there is a room for this, of course, because there is what Muslim scholar called فقه المآلات أو مراعاة المآلات, means looking at the ends of the action or looking at the consequences of your action. An action can be very legitimate. For example, defending yourself against an aggressor or an oppressor. But if that defense will lead to worse situation, not only for you, but for the whole community, that also might create a problematic issue here. So I think in general, to summarize, ethics is very important in politics. A principle and pragmatic politics. We need to be principled. We need to keep our moral, religious principles. At the same time, we need to have flexibility and pragmatism and to look at the context in which we are acting. Because as Max Weber explained in politics, the morality that applies in politics is what he called the morality of responsibility. Plus, we need to also benefit from the idea of Nye, Joseph Nye, about the contextual intelligence. Means we need to be intelligent, we need to be wise and smart, especially looking at the context in which we are acting politically. So that's basically what I have. Political ethics is very important for us today, and I think the more we are ethical in our political choices, the more that will be better for us and for the rest of the humanity. At the same time, we need to be practical. If you are ethical but not practical, that means you are a philosopher, you are not a politician. If you are too pragmatic and you don't care about principle, that will lead you to opportunism and Machiavellism, and that is, of course, against your principles as Muslims. So there is a room, there is some kind of common ground, a gray area between the two, abstract principle and practical pragmatism. In between the two boundaries, we can find a place to play politics in a very responsible way and within the limitation of our religion, our faith. Barakallah fikum. That's enough for tonight. I will be happy to discuss with you this reflection. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.